I've always been a skeptic, never one to believe in superstitions or the supernatural. I've lived in the same apartment in the city center for years, and it always felt comfortable and safe. The place had charm and a classic beauty, including a full-length mirror embedded in the master bedroom wall, a detail I always adored. Little did I know that mirror would become the epicenter of my worst nightmares. It all started subtly. One morning, while getting ready for work, I noticed something strange in the mirror. For a brief moment, it seemed like my reflection was out of sync with my movements. I brushed it off as a trick of the light and went on with my day. Over the next few weeks, the odd occurrences became more frequent. I started noticing strange shadows in the mirror, even when there was no one else around. One night, while brushing my teeth, I thought I saw a faint figure standing behind me. Panicked, I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. Still, the mirror reflected something I couldn't explain. The events grew more disturbing. I began to feel a presence when I looked in the mirror, a sensation of being watched. Sometimes, as I walked past, I would catch a glimpse of my reflection smiling slightly, even though my own lips hadn't moved. At first, I chalked it up to stress from work, thinking my mind was playing tricks on me. Things took a more unsettling turn. One morning, while applying makeup, I noticed my reflection blinked a second after I did. The next day, while tying my hair, I saw my reflection's lips moving as if whispering something I couldn't hear. During a work video call, I glanced at the mirror and saw the bedroom door slowly opening in the reflection. I turned to look, but the door was shut tight. These episodes became so frequent that I started avoiding the mirror, using it as little as possible. The situation escalated when I realized my reflection had a life of its own. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I saw my reflection slowly waving at me. I froze, unable to move, while my reflection continued to wave, its eyes locked onto mine with a look of sadness. In another instance, I was in my bedroom, brushing my hair, when I noticed my reflection was turned away from me, something that should have been impossible. When I blinked, the reflection was normal again, but the terror of that moment left me shaking. The feeling of being watched became unbearable. One night, I woke up with a strong sense of dread. Sitting up in bed, I looked at the mirror and saw something that paralyzed me. My reflection was gone. Instead, there was an old-fashioned woman with hollow eyes and a disturbing smile, staring back at me. Desperate, I decided to get rid of the mirror. With the help of some friends, I managed to take the mirror out of the apartment, hoping this would solve the problem. As we took the mirror to a junkyard, I felt an immediate sense of relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted off me. Despite getting rid of the mirror, I couldn't completely erase the experience from my mind. The apartment returned to normal, and the strange occurrences stopped. However, whenever I passed by a mirror, a faint sense of unease lingered, haunting me with the memory of what I had seen. If you are enjoying it, please consider subscribing and clicking the like button to support my channel. I've moved to the Scottish Highlands about 2 years ago, looking for peace and quiet after a messy breakup. I found this adorable little cottage, all stone walls and thatched roof, nestled in a valley with views that could make your heart stop. It was perfect, or so I thought. The first few months were exactly what I needed. I'd wake up to the sound of sheep bleating in the distance, spend my days working from home as a freelance graphic designer, and my evenings curled up by the fireplace with a good book. But then, as winter settled in and the nights grew longer, things started to change. It began subtly. I'd wake up at exactly 3:17 a.m. every single night. At first, I brushed it off as stress or my body clock being weird. But then I started noticing other things. The room would be freezing cold, even though I'd left the heating on. My breath would fog in front of my face, and I'd feel this presence. Like someone was watching me. I tried to rationalize it. Old houses make weird noises, right? The wind can play tricks on you. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I'd lie there, heart pounding, too terrified to move or even open my eyes fully. I'd just wait frozen until I felt whatever it was leave, and then I'd drift off into an uneasy sleep. After a few weeks of this, I decided I needed to know what was happening. I set up my laptop on the dresser, facing my bed, and left it recording all night. The next morning, with shaking hands, I played back the footage. For hours, nothing. Just me, sleeping peacefully. And then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., I saw it. A figure, tall and dark, just appeared at the foot of my bed. It didn't walk in. It was just suddenly there. I watched, my blood turning to ice, as it stood there, perfectly still, watching me sleep. After about 10 minutes, it vanished, just as suddenly as it had appeared. I think I screamed. I know I cried. I called my best friend, babbling and hysterical, and she drove up from Glasgow that day. She stayed with me for a week, but nothing happened while she was there. I almost managed to convince myself it was all in my head. But when she left, it started again. Every night, 3:17 a.m. The cold. The presence. And now I knew what was waiting for me if I opened my eyes. I tried everything. I sage-smudged the house. I hung crosses and dream catchers. I even had a local priest come and bless the place. Nothing worked. I started sleeping with the lights on, but that just made the shadows deeper, more threatening. I became obsessed with trying to figure out who or what this figure was. I dug into the history of the cottage, the land it was built on. I found out that centuries ago, this valley was the site of a brutal clan battle. Hundreds of men died here, their bodies left unburied for weeks. Was one of them still here, unable to rest? Or was it something more recent? The previous owner of the cottage had died here, an old woman who lived alone for decades. Could it be her, watching over her home? The lack of answers was driving me mad. I wasn't sleeping. I could barely eat. My work was suffering. But I couldn't leave. This was my home, damn it, and I wasn't going to be chased out by some. Whatever it was. One night, about 6 months after it all started, I decided I'd had enough. When I felt the presence enter my room, I forced myself to open my eyes and sit up. And there it was, at the foot of my bed. A dark, human-shaped shadow, but with no features I could make out. My voice shaking, I spoke to it. "Who are you? What do you want?" For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, it raised an arm and pointed at me. I felt a cold so intense it burned wash over me. And then, in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, it spoke. "You." I must have passed out because the next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital. They told me my neighbors had found me, hypothermic and delirious, wandering in the fields near my cottage. I tried to tell them what happened, but of course, they didn't believe me. How could they? I never went back to the cottage. I couldn't. I left everything behind and moved in with my parents back in London. But even now, years later, I still wake up every night at 3:17 a.m., my heart racing, half expecting to see that figure standing at the foot of my bed. I don't know what it was. A ghost? A hallucination? Some kind of entity we don't have a name for? All I know is that it was real, it was terrifying, and it changed me forever. The highlands may look peaceful and serene, but trust me, there are things out there in the endless night that we can't explain, and maybe shouldn't try to. It all started when I moved into this old farmhouse just outside of Philadelphia. I'd always dreamed of living in a place with some history, you know. Something with character. Well, I got more than I bargained for. That's for sure. The house was beautiful. All weathered wood and creaky floorboards. It was perfect, or so I thought. The realtor had mentioned something about the place being built in the late 1800s, which only added to its charm. What she didn't mention was what was lurking beneath it. I'd been living there for about a month when I first noticed something off. It was little things at first: a misplaced book, a chair that wasn't quite where I'd left it. I chalked it up to absent-mindedness, maybe stress from the move. But then, I started hearing noises at night. It wasn't like the usual creaks and groans you'd expect from an old house. These were different. Shuffling sounds, like someone trying to move quietly. And they were coming from below. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down to the basement. Now, I'd been down there before to do laundry, but I'd never really explored it. It was your typical basement: concrete floors, exposed pipes, that musty smell that seems to linger in every old house. But as I swept my flashlight across the room, something caught my eye. There, behind an old shelving unit, was the edge of what looked like a door. My heart started racing as I pushed the shelf aside. Sure enough, there was a door, small, maybe 4 feet tall, made of old, weathered wood. I stood there for a moment, just staring at it. Part of me wanted to run back upstairs, pretend I'd never seen it. But curiosity got the better of me. With shaking hands, I reached out and turned the rusty handle. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow passageway. The air that wafted out was damp and stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I shone my flashlight down the tunnel, but the beam only penetrated a few feet before being swallowed by the darkness. That's when I saw them footprints in the dust. And they were fresh. I felt my blood run cold. Someone had been using this tunnel, coming into my house. But why? And where did it lead? I don't know what possessed me, but I decided right then and there that I needed to find out. I grabbed my phone, making sure I had service, took a deep breath, and ducked into the tunnel. The passageway was narrow and low. I had to crouch to move through it. The walls were rough-hewn stone, slick with moisture. Every step I took echoed in the silence, making me wince. I felt like I was descending into some forgotten catacomb. I'd been walking for what felt like hours, though my phone told me it had only been about 15 minutes, when I heard a scraping sound, like shoes on stone, coming from up ahead. My heart leapt into my throat. Someone was down here with me. I quickly turned off my flashlight, plunging myself into total darkness. The sound stopped. For a moment, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. Then, a light flickered in the distance. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran, no longer caring about the noise I was making. I could hear footsteps behind me, getting closer. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning. I was lost, disoriented in the darkness. Suddenly, my foot caught on something, and I went down hard, my flashlight clattering away into the darkness. Pain shot through my knee, but adrenaline kept me moving. I scrambled to my feet, feeling my way along the wall. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear heavy breathing that wasn't my own. In desperation, I fumbled for my phone, using its dim light to guide me. That's when I saw a ladder leading up to what looked like a trapdoor. Without hesitation, I lunged for it, climbing as fast as I could. I could feel the vibrations of someone climbing after me. With all my strength, I pushed against the trapdoor. For a heart-stopping moment, it wouldn't budge. Then, with a groan, it gave way and I tumbled out onto grass. I was in someone's backyard. The night air had never felt so good. I slammed the trapdoor shut and looked around wildly. I was in a suburban neighborhood, not far from my own house. I ran. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. When I finally stopped, I was back on my street, my house in sight. The police came, of course. They searched the tunnels but found nothing, no intruder, no evidence. They told me the tunnels were probably left over from Prohibition, used for smuggling alcohol. But that didn't explain the footprints, the noises. I've since had the door in my basement sealed up. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear shuffling sounds coming from below. And I can't shake the feeling that whoever or whatever was down there is still watching, waiting for another chance to surface. I don't know if I'll ever feel completely safe in my home again. But I do know one thing sometimes. The charm of an old house comes with a price. And in my case, that price was my peace of mind. I'd been there for about 3 months when I started noticing little things. Nothing major at first, just stuff that made me go, huh. Like, I'd come home and swear I'd left a book on the coffee table, but now it was on the shelf. Or I'd find a window cracked open that I was sure I'd closed. I brushed it off, figuring I was just being forgetful. There was this neighbor across the hall, real quiet type. I'd only seen him a couple times in passing. Middle-aged guy, kinda scruffy looking. He'd nod if we passed in the hallway, but that was about it. I didn't think much of him at the time. Then one night, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I felt this weird draft. It was the middle of summer, so it caught my attention. I got up to check the window, but it was closed tight. That's when I noticed this tiny pinprick of light coming from the wall behind my dresser. I moved the dresser aside, and there it was, a small hole, about the size of a pencil eraser. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone and shined the flashlight through it, and I swear to God, I saw an eye staring back at me. I screamed and stumbled backward, nearly falling over. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. I ran out of the bedroom and slammed the door shut, like that would keep whatever was on the other side away. I called the police right away, hands shaking so bad I could barely dial. They came and checked it out, but by then, there was no one in the neighboring apartment. They found more holes, though, in the bathroom, the living room. The thought of someone watching me shower, watching me sleep. I felt violated in the worst way possible. The cops said they'd investigate, but without catching the guy in the act, there wasn't much they could do. They told me to stay with a friend for a few days while they looked into it. I packed a bag and stayed with my coworker Sarah. A week went by, and the police hadn't found anything. I was a nervous wreck, jumping at every little noise. But I couldn't stay at Sarah's forever, and I had to get back to work. So, against my better judgment, I went back to my apartment. Everything seemed normal at first. I tried to go about my routine, but I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched. I put tape over all the holes I knew about, but I was paranoid there were more I hadn't found. Then, 3 nights after I'd moved back in, I woke up around a.m. to this scratching sound. At first, I thought it was just the building settling or something. But then, I heard footsteps. Quiet, careful footsteps, like someone was trying not to be heard. I froze in my bed, barely breathing. The footsteps were getting closer to my bedroom. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, trying not to make a sound. That's when I noticed my bedroom door was open. I always closed it before going to bed. I heard a floorboard creak right outside my room, and I knew I had to act. I bolted up, grabbing my phone and keys, and made a run for it. As I burst out of my room, I caught a glimpse of a figure in the darkness. It was him, my neighbor. He lunged at me, but I managed to dodge him and sprint for the front door. My hands were shaking so bad, I could barely get the key in the lock. I could hear him coming up behind me, his breathing heavy and fast. Just as his hand grabbed my shoulder, I got the door open and ran out into the hallway, screaming at the top of my lungs. Lights started coming on in other apartments, doors opening. My neighbor disappeared back into my apartment. The police came, and this time they caught him. Turns out he'd been doing this for years, to multiple tenants. They found cameras, recordings, all sorts of creepy stuff in his apartment. I moved out the next day. I couldn't stand being in that place for another minute. It took me a long time to feel safe again, even in a new apartment. I still check for holes in the walls, still get paranoid when I hear a noise at night. Thank you for listening. Now try to sleep.